Alrighty, so I've got another deck guide for you. This time it's going to be Luke Data Vault. This is the Pilot Luke from JTL. Been having some success with this one. It attacks into a lot of different decks very differently than what you might expect. It kind of dodges the ground completely, which is kind of a cool place to be right now when everyone's slinging giant force units on the ground. So just a cool little build that I want to share with you. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. And if you're interested in some more content from me, including deck updates, which includes this deck as well, do check out my Patreon. All right, so first of all, table of contents is going to talk about why I'm playing this leader, why I'm running it specifically with Data Vault and green. Then we'll do a card by card breakdown of the deck list, and then a few quick hitter topics such as staying flexible, the flip turn management, and the ground interaction. And finally, I cap it off with some other options you can consider for this build. All right, so why Luke? Well, first of all, this is a deck that doesn't play Force Throw, so that's pretty cool, right? Tons of decks play that card. It's also a deck that doesn't really interact on the terms of the Force decks. So we're a pure space deck. Borrowed a little bit of the theory behind the Pilot Vader deck where, you know, if you just ignore all the busyness on the ground, you can just get there with pure aggression in space sometimes. And Luke does it a little differently. This is not quite as turbo aggro as the Vader deck is, for instance. It doesn't dump its hand as quickly. It has a little more nuanced interaction. So, yep, you lose some speed. You gain some interaction. You also gain a bit more of a sturdy leader. Vader, of course, is susceptible to upgrade hate. The Luke leader is not. That's one really cool piece of text on the flip. So it dodges things like Disabling Fangfighter and Confiscate. It still gets one shot by Bamboozle. That's unfortunate. And of course, cards like Rivals Full, which would hit the leader. But it dodges a bunch of other interaction. And then why green? So I think the most popular versions of this deck I've seen are usually just in mono red because of Tarkin Town, and that works well with Luke's pinging ability. But I kind of opted for a different direction here. So what the Data Vault here is not, it's not because we want to play more cards. It's almost entirely because of the life. We're an aggro deck, but we're just an aggro deck with a giant life pool. And this was tried a little bit with Sabine Data Vault in the previous set as well. And it kind of just works. When you are the aggro deck and you just have longer to play, you can sometimes race other aggro decks. You sometimes just prolong games long enough against like mid-range decks where even though they can kind of gain control, you can get there because of your life pool difference, right? 33, a lot of the Force decks play 28, so even though they have robust units on the ground, we have a 5-point health lead against them. Against something like Sabine, we have an 8-point health lead, so it just helps there. And then the green, I've named a few very important cards in this deck. Now, the green is not the most important part of it in general, but Resistance Blue Squadron is a really nice unit to have to be able to interact on the ground very early in the game and often finish off units, especially because we ping with our leader effect as well. It also adds just like a chunky fighter into play, which is nice. And then Air Superiority, which is just a cheaper open fire, is played very well in this deck. Of course, it only hits ground, but almost everything's on the ground. And in space, we're actually kind of covered. We're a pretty good space deck, so we can fight up there on our own terms. And having a cheap open fire is really nice in this format, where we can just kind of like brick the first few turns of some of these Force decks. This deck's going to play open fire too, so I'm just going to play all of these deal 4 to the ground arena sort of stuff. But the 2 cost is very important, which is something we'll talk about later. And then lastly, Salvage. So this pulls double duty here. It's a 0 cost card, so of course, Force Throw. Now, you can't play around Force Throw all the time. The card's broken entirely, but it's nice that we get to play a 0 cost in this deck, unironically, because the card's actually just kind of good. We're playing a pure vehicle deck, so this just gives us redundancy on any of the units we might want to bring back, right? Like Resistance Blue Squadron or Red 5, which pulls a lot of weight in this deck, or even just a 2-drop if we wanted to go like 2+2 on the 4 resource turn, and we didn't draw that other 2-drop. Well, the one that died can just come back, right? That 1 damage isn't going to matter that much. So salvage is really nice to have like redundancy for any unit we might want to play, in addition to how it bricks force throw. All right, so here's the list for you. Don't worry about the sideboard. That's just a maybe board, which we'll look at later. So salvage, I've talked about. There's only one drop unit that I'm running. It's Crackshot V-Wing. It's going to help in some situations when we're trying to break up our curve a little bit, even as early as turn 2, where we can go 1 drop plus 2 drop on the 4 resource turn if we want to like open fire and then play Crackshot. Now that's going to be much more useful if we have air superiority. We can do air superiority plus a 2 drop, but it's just really nice to have this curve filler in the deck. This is almost always going to be just a 1-cost 2/2 because our deck is entirely fighters, right? Got R2-D2, and the only other pilot I play is Chewbacca. So these are the 2 pilots, R2-D2, right? This is another cheap card, of course. We have a few to toss for force throw. It just messes with math sometimes if your opponent thinks they're going to be able to remove something. It's used primarily to like interact with certain breakpoints, right? If you know certain removal might be coming, make Overwhelming Barrage a little more awkward, right? Because one of your units is going to live. Buff up a unit's health past things like Takedown or Open Fire. On the flip turn, trying to pair this with Luke's flip to make sure that you go over a certain amount of health, right? It's just wiggle room here. It's not played too often. It's just, it comes up sometimes. We got a couple one-shot events, one-cost events here. Hot Shot Maneuver is really nice. For the most part, this is going to be kind of like Daring Raid, that action cheats, right? A lot of the units here have on attacks, so use that Hot Shot Maneuver, and you get that 2 damage immediately, plus action cheat your attack. It works, of course, fantastically with Red 5, where you'll be doing 4 damage to something, potentially killing it. And then the real, like, crazy one is if you have Luke on a unit that has an on attack already. Now you have 2 on attacks on that unit, and you can get the double trigger, the Hot Shot Maneuver, deal 4 with it. And of course, Sabine's Masterpiece can get there as well if you have a red and a green unit in play. Trench Run, this is just for racing situations. You kind of have to just roll with it. We're not gaming this. It could brick you completely. Not typically going to use this on any low health units. It's often just trying to win races. So, you know, with our Luke leader on it, where even if your opponent draws like an 8 damage difference or something, which is often not going to be the case, the unit will still live, right? So this is 4 damage for 1 cost is insane value. So for the most part, it's in emergency situations, if like this is the only way we can win, or if we're pushing damage with some of our bigger sized units, right? Like we have some higher health units, especially once there's pilots on them. Now we have just a bunch of 2 drops here, so I'm not, they're like, the point is we want tons of flexibility in the 2 and 3 drop slot. So these are the ones that I went with: Anakin's Interceptor, Black One, Green Squadron A-Wing, Gray Squadron Y-Wing, and Red Squadron Y-Wing. I didn't want any 2 health units, right? I played a bit with the Phoenix Squadron, the 3/2. You know, it's just worse against Force Throw, and it's really bad against Grogu right now, which is in all the Han decks. So let's just stick with 3 health. There's a few others you can look at as well, but these are the ones I went with. There's a few 2/3s. They're not the best. Green Squadron is probably the best one. Then the Gray and Red Squadron are probably the next best ones. Anakin's Interceptor later in the game can be better than all of these, of course. And Black One is for the most part just vanilla. But we do have some pilots, of course, so there's room for it to be better. Air superiority I mentioned. Stay on target. Just a pump, right? That's nice. It's not as good as Surprise Strike for the most part, but it gives us our card back if we want to push damage towards base. So just nice to have a little extra reach. And then the 3 drop slot, we got Blue Leader, Disabling Fangfighter, Red 5, Red 3, and Sabine's Masterpiece. They all perform different things of different importance at different times of the game. Red 5 is the best of these cards for the most part. One of the best cards in this deck specifically, but they all do something really good, right? Red 3, if your opponent's not interacting well, is a huge threat. Disabling Fangfighter, it's nice to have some main deck upgrade hate. We actually have 2 more pieces we'll see in a moment. Blue Leader, right? If we need to clear off some space walls, or even just some units that might be interacting with us, right? There's a lot of 2/3s in space that this cleanly kills. This is actually the only like real ground unit we can play. There's, of course, the pilots like Chewbacca and R2, but Blue Leader can get rid of something on the ground that is and must kill, which is nice. And then Sabine's Masterpiece has the highest ceiling of any of these cards. If you can get, especially if you get like a green unit in play. Now, there really isn't that many. They're either Blue Leader, the Blue Squadron, or the Patrol Wing. But if you do that, it's fantastic. But with the red, it's also really good because it double dips the pings that you get from your base for the most part. So now we got open fire as well, so it's just redundancy with air superiority. It's just important to get rid of some units on the ground. It's important to get rid of some units in space that might be trading profitably with some of our things. So we need this extra removal, especially early in the game while opponents are getting set up. Things like this and air superiority also one-shot something like Kira, or kind of a lot of units that you might be barraging from the ground on you, which is important. And Resistance Blue Squadron as well is more ground interaction and just a really nice unit to have. Finally, Adelphi Patrol Wing, our biggest statted space unit, and it's also a fighter, which is really nice. It curves into the Luke 6 resource flip turn, and it action cheats, which is great. This deck does throw initiative a lot, but if you can perform an early claim and then use this to get that extra damage, you're going to be great. And even without the extra damage, remember, it's still action cheats, so it's a really good card. Chewbacca, this is for stealing some games. It's still really good when people don't respect it. It's a little dangerous to play it on turn 2 against decks playing Force Throw because they can self-Force Throw a mid-sized unit. Usually like 6 damage will kill whatever you put Chewbacca on. And in that case, you just get completely blown out. So it's better into like controlling decks. Better when you know the coast is kind of clear for it. And it just adds a bunch of damage and makes it very difficult for your opponent to deal with. High value card, just pick your spots. And lastly, another upgrade main deck hate card in Kit Fisto's Ether Sprite, but it's also just a really large space unit. So it's another one that Luke flips onto pretty well. And, you know, who doesn't want just a little bit of extra upgrade removal? So this is the main deck I have went with, and we'll be tweaking it as I play some more with the deck. All right, so a little bit on staying flexible with this deck. As I mentioned, this deck has a ton of 2 and 3 drop units for redundancy. The idea here is basically after turn 2, you have a lot of flexibility with how you deploy your units and then when you decide to attack with things. In a lot of cases, you want to get a lot of attacks in first. You don't need to always deploy, but sometimes you need to do some of your removal early, in which case you have cheap options like Hot Shot Maneuver to deal 2, maybe finish something off, Air Superiority and Open Fire, but you want to pair all these cards with other units, right? You almost always need to be playing a unit every turn, and that's why so much of the deck is built with a low cost curve in mind, so that once you're basically on the 4R turn, you get to do 2 things a lot of the time, which is either play 2 units or play interaction plus unit, right? There's only one 4-cost unit in the whole deck, and it is an interactive 4-cost unit, the Resistance Squadron. So otherwise, we're playing a few cards a lot of the time, and we have a lot of cheap cards, right? So we get to stay as flexible as possible, and Crackshot V-Wing is really important for that because it can go into any curve. So that's really nice to have, but for the most part, the 2 drops work just as well when curve filling, especially when you have cards like Air Superiority and Hot Shot Maneuver in your deck. So that's what we're talking about by staying flexible. You tailor your hand so that you can do multiple things starting basically on 4R. And then you also get a lot of action churning because you should have a decent amount of units in play. You have your action from your leader ability, the ping. So you get to kind of wait out to decide what you want to be doing. So keep options in your hand, right? You have a hand that has multiple 3 drops. That's great. They all do something different, right? Red 3 and Disabling Fang Fighter do different things. Keep them both. Let's see if our opponent goes for that Gunji General's Blade play. If not, we can go with that red 3, pump our board, force our opponent now to interact with us because they can't race this card. Things like that. And it just presents itself throughout the game because you have a lot of different options with your space units. All right, let's talk about the flip turn. So be careful about like autopiling and auto flip with this leader. he hits so hard on the ground too, 5 damage. That's actually more damage than you would get if you put him on a unit. So remember that. That's like, you're allowed to flip on the ground. Now, he presents tons of value in space, and condensing actions is really nice, right? You flip him onto a unit that has 3 power or 4 power, you hit for like 7 or 8 in one action, then all of a sudden maybe your opponent has to claim, because if you did it again, you would just win, right? I'm not saying our goal isn't to flip this onto a unit. I'm just reminding you, you don't have to. There's one key breakpoint you need to think about in this meta right now, and that is because of Force Throw. And a lot of decks play Force Throw with Crate Dragon in the deck. That's specifically like the hero mid-range Force decks. If you're playing against a different kind of Force deck, maybe Quinlan or Talzin or whatever it is, maybe they don't have 9 drops in their deck, and you don't have to think about 1 cost deal 9. But if you do, there are a couple units in this deck, Kit Fisto's Aether Sprite and Adelphi Patrol Wing, where you can flip onto, and they can't one-shot it with a Force Throw crate. And then R2 is another card that can buff the health of all the 4 health units, put them up to 5, and then you can deploy onto them to go up to 10, right? So those are kind of the dance you have to play a little bit. It's incredibly devastating and incredibly obnoxious, I will say, that this can die to a 1-cost self-toss, but that's just the world we're living in currently. And maybe it won't be forever, in which case we'll definitely be able to tweak how we're deploying our flip turn. But in a lot of times when I play this deck, I'm just attacking with every unit I have in space. My opponent's just waiting for me to deploy, so I just hit. Eventually they have to do something, and then if I need to, I'll just flip on the ground and hit for 5, and it's like fine, right? I don't need to flip into a space unit immediately all the time. It's really nice to just like kind of mess with your opponent that way, because they are going to be very scared of this card. They're thinking about how to interact with it from the start. They have to, right? Because they can't upgrade hate it. So what else could they possibly be holding on to? Bamboozle, Rival's Fall, Force Throw. These are ways they can deal with it. Or they try to race him. That's another option, of course. And in those cases, flipping onto a unit is better because it, like I said, it action condenses. And then you get upsides with like Hot Shot Maneuver as well. Trench Run is basically always going to work because you have tons of health on this leader. So yes, we look for openings to get this on a unit and attack. But sometimes we are open to staying on the ground. We keep track of our breakpoints. We keep track of whether or not we even need to deploy if our opponent is presenting ways to interact, but they have to hold up resources. An early claim is always an option. So there's wiggle room here. And remember, you don't have to worry about upgrade hate. That's a really nice part about this leader deploy. So I think compared to most pilot leaders, you have a little more flexibility. And lastly, let's look at how we're interacting with the ground. We've talked about all these cards already, but you got this Luke leader, of course. So you got the pings. They add up over time to remove some units, especially in conjunction with things like Hot Shot Maneuver, which will deal an extra 2, an action sheet, Red 5, Sabine's Masterpiece. Blue leader is some interaction on the ground in a pinch, and then our events, Air Superiority and Open Fire, are the biggest deals, as is our Resistance Blue Squadron. These 3 cards are ways to deal chunk damage to units on the ground if we need to. So you have a lot of ways to do it. You're not, at a certain point, you're not going to be interacting anymore. It's just enough to help us get over the hump to make it so that we are winning the race, right? Ground units tend to be bigger than space units, but it's harder to interact with space units. So we just need to even the score there. We need to get rid of some restore on the ground. We need to get rid of some bigger units that could be racing us, some overwhelming barrage targets, potentially. Force units, maybe we can keep our opponent off the force temporarily, especially when we go first. Things like Air Superiority and Open Fire do that very, very well. So you just try to get that small margin, and then that's it. Now we're just a space deck, right? We're putting tons of pressure in space and making it difficult for our opponent to interact with us while we slowly chip away at some units with our like little pings, our incidental damage, with all this other stuff going on. So it works pretty well, and I believe it's just enough interaction. Maybe we look for one more piece if we can find it, but it does a good job as is. And then lastly, I just want to shout out 12 cards here. It's not a full list, but these are just some things that you can look at. Daring Raid would be another option for some cheap interaction. It works in conjunction with the rest of the pinging. We got a few pilots I've included here, like Luke and Poe. You know, the upsides of these are that they double as ground units, but it doesn't really do anything if Luke dies and goes to the ground. He just gets killed by everything. And like Poe as well, for the most part, his best trait is actually just the piloting effect. 2 cost for +2/+3 is pretty nice. So they're both decent things to maybe play around with. I didn't think they were insane high value right now, so that's why I didn't include them. But Phoenix Squadron A-Wing is a card I would prefer as a 2-drop, but the problem is the 2 health, I think, is a major liability in the format right now. Oh, Biggs is another pilot, and he's a 1 cost +2/+1. It gives Overwhelm to fighters. I wish it gave, like, the transport text was the fighter text +2/+2, because Overwhelm is not a particularly useful trait to have on our little fighters, so that's why I haven't worked with him. Eager Escort would be a nice thing to include if we expected more space battles. It's a pretty cheap removal, basically. It also neatly triggers our Luke ability immediately because it attacks. Wing Leader, there are a decent amount of fighters in the deck. We might need a few more, but that's an option to include in addition to like Chewbacca, which is kind of doing this sort of effect as well. Clone Combat Squadron happens to be a fighter. It works so much better in a Vader deck, but there is a world where it could fit in here. And then Bombing Run, if we wanted more ground interaction, this is one that's worth exploring a little more. Innately, I kind of think it probably won't do enough because units will have too much health. But with all our pinging damage from Luke's ability and things like Hot Shot Maneuver, maybe Sabine's Masterpiece, whatever it is, we've talked about all the cards. Maybe there actually is a world where we can whittle down a couple units before we Bombing Run and actually get like 2 or 3 kills with it. And that's something I definitely want to explore. Timely Reinforcement would be a nice like anti-control late game card. It works really well against those decks because it makes a ton of units, which is hard to deal with. And then Choose Sides would also be for those kinds of matchups, especially matchups that play large ships like Devastator. And U-Wing Reinforcement, I think all 3 of these cards are kind of for control, right? U-Wing is not searching us anything broken. It's just going to put like 3 units into play every time, which is kind of cool. It's similar to Timely Reinforcements. Maybe Timely is just better because it can scale more than 3 units, but U-Wing, of course, will give you better units than the Timely Reinforcements. So these are some options to mess around with. I'm certain there's more, but that's what I got for you. I know this one's a little short, but let me know what you think of this deck. Try it out. Give me some ways that you might want to improve it, things that you like about Luke in general. I know there's some other versions like Tarkin Town, even ECL and whatnot. So I think this leader has actually a pretty bright future too, especially after rotation, where maybe the power level of some of the current aggro decks comes down and some of the really crazy anti-pilot cards go away, like Bamboozle. I think we might see an increase in strength for the Luke deck. So like I said, let me know what you think, and until next time, take care.